Welcome to the last class in the series of laws of Shabbat. This is class number 8. Today we will cover a few important melachot of Shabbat. Number 1 is kneading. We're not allowed to mix dry substance with liquid in order to produce paste-like consistency. For example, kneading flour with water to make dough, or even to mix clay with water to make molding clay, or to mix dry cement mixture with water to produce cement. All these are forbidden according to Torah. Rabbinically, we're also forbidden to even add water without mixing. For example, you have flour. We're not allowed to add water to a bowl of flour. Let's say you have a recipe that requires you to pour water and then mix it later. We're not allowed even to add water. Now, there are not only that, some dry substances, they don't produce a paste. For example, you take sand and you mix it with water, it's not going to stick together. It's going to stay, each grain of sand is going to stay separate. But still, we're not allowed to mix it with water. Pouring water on sand is not prohibited because it doesn't stick together, as opposed to pouring water on cement mixture or clay, dry clay mixture or flour. Even pouring is forbidden because since it's forbidden according to Torah to mix it, so rabbinically it's forbidden even to pour water. However, things that don't mix, like sand or ash, it's permitted to add water, but you're not allowed to mix it. So what's an example? Why would you add water to sand? For example, you're outside and you need to wash your hands. We're not allowed to wash our hands over grass or over any area that potentially can grow plants. However, if it's sand or gravel where nothing is growing, I can wash my hands there. And even though I'm adding water to sand, that's permitted. But I wouldn't be able to mix the sand afterwards. Now, what about mixing water and salt or water and sugar? Or water and coffee? So we have a leniency that any solid that dissolves in water, you're allowed to mix it with water. So even though at the moment as you're pouring, the sugar is still there, the salt is still there, and the coffee is still there, and the first few drops, if I stop right there, may produce paste, but I continue pouring and it gets all dissolved, that's fine. We learned a separate prohibition that we're not allowed to make brine, salt water. But as far as making a paste and kneading, it's not prohibited. And therefore, at times when I can make the solution, either with sugar, coffee, or salt water, a small amount, I'm allowed to mix it with water. A question is asked, am I allowed to make jello on Shabbat or pudding? So there is a machloket, there are different opinions. we follow the more strict opinion, even though there are opinions that allow you to add water to the mixture of the jello, and they allow it because right now it's liquid. Only after some time it will jellify. But we follow the more strict opinion that we cannot mix the powder with water, since eventually it will produce jello or pudding. So it looks like I'm kneading. Right now I'm mixing solid with liquid, and eventually it will produce jello. That is forbidden for us. If somebody did it already, you can rely on the lenient opinions that allow it, and you can eat it. Similarly, we're not allowed to make potato puree by mixing potato flakes with water. And that is because the puree that we're trying to make has a consistency that's similar to dough. And similarly, when I make cereal for my children, baby cereal, I have to be careful not to create thick paste, but rather liquidy. So for a child, for a baby, I'm allowed to mix the oatmeal or rice flakes with water, but I should add more water than on a weekday to make it more liquidy, and I should not mix it vigorously, but rather gently, preferably in a crisscross manner, to show that I'm not really kneading, I'm not doing it in a regular way that looks like I'm creating a thick paste, but I'm changing the consistency and I'm changing the way I do it. And two more leniencies that we have about this halacha. Number one, we have a rule that ein lisha achar lisha. There is no kneading after kneading. Therefore, if I started the process of kneading already, and I'm going to give you an example, I can continue it. What is the process of kneading? I already added some liquid to this solid powder. And now on Shabbat I want to add more liquid. That's permitted. An example of that is tehina or hummus. Let's say your tehina or hummus is too thick and you would like to make it more liquidy. I'm allowed to add more water or oil or lemon juice and mix it, because I already did it from before. And since it already the process finished, and now I'm just adding to make it more liquidy, it's permitted. But still, usually to begin with, when we make tehina, you have to shake it a lot, otherwise it doesn't mix well. So on Shabbat, don't mix it vigorously, but again, mix it gently. And the second leniency is if the pieces of this paste are visible and separate, it's not considered kneading. For example, if you have a salad, potato salad, olivier, even if the pieces are small, you're still allowed to add mayonnaise and mix it, because even though it seems that the pieces get stuck together through mayonnaise and now creates one blob instead of just small pieces separate, still it's permitted because each piece remains distinct. The piece of potato, the piece of carrot, the piece of egg, it does not blend into one. Unlike dough, where the flour and water, they fuse together and they make one, different entity. Yes?
So if you have orsua, can you add water to it?
So adding water to our savoy depends how and when. If after you remove it from fire, you want to add hot water to it, that's okay. But if you want to put it back onto fire, that's a problem for Sephardim. So after it finished cooking and you're ready to serve, and it came out too thick, and you want to make it more liquidy, so at that point you can add hot water to it.
So I could never put it back on the.
Yes, for Sephardim, since we are strict about liquids on Shabbat, more than Ashkenazim, and we don't allow liquids that cooled off slightly to go back to the blech. So
hot water, like from the urn.
even though it's hot, but we are extra strict, not according to everybody, but the practical halacha is that we should try to be strict and not add even that water, because again the concern is that as the water is being poured from the urn, it stops boiling, and then when you put it back on the blech, it starts boiling again. So it looks like the water is being reheated, recooked. Ashkenazim are more lenient. There are some Sephardim who are more lenient also, but the practical halacha for us is only add hot water to it after you take it off the fire and you're not planning to bring it back. Now, some people ask, is there a way I can solve this issue? Sometimes I wake up, maybe often the Osh Savo is dry. What do I do? So some suggest to add another container with water inside the pot. And since it's inside the pot, you're not adding anything into the pot. All you're doing is tilting the container and pouring the water out. For example, you put the Osh Savo, and on the top of Osh Savo, you put a bowl with water. It's cooking, and then no, it's and in the morning you wake up, it's dry. So all you have to do is tilt as much water you want out of the bowl or the entire bowl. Take out the bowl, and that's it. It's done. Again, you cannot mix the Osh Savo while it's still on fire, but you take it off, then you can empty, and you can. Here it's permitted because you're not putting new water that wasn't on a blech onto the blech, but rather the water that was already in the pot, already on the blech. Now it's just, it used to be separate, now it's inside, and then you can mix it when it's off the fire and put it back.
So then if that's the case, can I put like, a little bit of water in a teapot, like, separately on a blech, but not in the pot, and then just add it?
That we also are strict about, right? So the two possible ways to actually add water is to either put a bowl in the middle of Osh Savo, and then when necessary to pour it out, or some people put a plastic bag with water on top of Osh Savo, and if they ever need, they just poke it and the water comes out.
Do we have to cook it overnight? Does it have to be on overnight?
Osh Savo doesn't have to be cooked overnight. As long as it's fully cooked and it's solid, you can put it on the blech in the morning. And another way to prevent it from burning is to move it to less hot part of the blech, or to put something in between to raise it away from the flame. Put an empty pan upside down and put it on, or put a grate, on top of the blech. You can put another grate and then put the pot on. This way, it's not going to continue burning. Or just as you serve, before you serve, add hot water and mix it. Okay, so we are allowed to add mayonnaise or oil to our salads and mix them well because each piece is separate. Now, next topic for today is building, and that is the melacha of boneh. There is a Torah prohibition attaching anything to the ground or to a structure that's connected to the ground already. For example, taking a stick and inserting it into the ground. or putting one brick on top of another brick, or putting one board, piece of wood on top of another, or nailing, or making a hole in a wall for purpose of improving the wall, as opposed to just damaging. Similarly, forming a permanent mechitza. A temporary mechitza is permissible, but forming a permanent mechitza is forbidden. Similarly, if a door comes off its hinges, since the door is attached to the house, we're not allowed to put it on. And anything that we cannot build on Shabbat, we cannot disassemble on Shabbat. So I cannot take the door off its hinges on Shabbat. I cannot take a window out or put it back in on Shabbat. If a window has a part that is designed to be put on and off, that I can do. But if it's permanently attached, I cannot remove it. And therefore, if I have a sliding door, I cannot take it off. I can open it and close it, but I cannot take it off, or if it fell off, I cannot reattach it, because that would be building.
Can I ask you a question about that? If let's say it does fall off like one of the hinges, right? You cannot take off the other? Isn't it a form of danger for the kids?
Yes, it's if it's dangerous, you can prevent danger. But if there is a different way to prevent danger, for example, lean it on a wall and put a few chairs there to hold it, that's preferable. Similarly, if curtain that's attached to the rod that's attached to the wall over the window, blinds, curtain, fell off, I cannot put it back on. And not only I cannot create a wall, but I also cannot create a tent or a roof. If it's permanent, it is prohibited according to Torah, and if it's temporary, it's prohibited according to the rabbis. So here we have a difference between a temporary mechitza, temporary wall, and a temporary roof. Temporary wall is permitted. So in a synagogue, many times that's what we use. At the time of minyan, we take folding mechitza and we open it up. That's permitted because this is a temporary wall. But a temporary roof is forbidden. What is a roof? What is a tent? Tent or a roof is anything that protects things that are underneath from the elements, either from sunlight or from rain. As opposed to, I am allowed to open a folding table, even though I'm creating that what seems a tent, but since a table is not designed to protect what's underneath, but rather to use the top, I'm allowed to do it. Similarly, I'm allowed to open a folding chair. Since the chair is designed to sit on top and not to hide underneath, it's not considered a tent or a roof.
Is that why we cannot make umbrellas on Shabbat?
That is why we cannot open an umbrella on Shabbat, even though it's temporary. And even though it's not standing by itself, I have to hold it. But still, rabbinically, it's forbidden.
But why is hat allowed?
A hat? Because...
Am I allowed to carry like a
So,
plastic bag or something?
yes, so here we need to define what are the parameters of a tent. The tent must be at least a tefach, a hand breadth. So therefore, anything that's attached to your head and covers you completely is not a problem. It's considered clothing, as opposed to something that sticks beyond your body at least a tefach, and it's designed to protect you from the elements. That would be forbidden. Therefore, if a person is wearing a hat for the purpose of protecting him from rain, and the rain is and the hat is made from hard material that doesn't bend, it's a hard hat, and it's at least a tefach 8 centimeters wide, it would be a problem. However, most people wear hats not to protect them from rain, but rather to look nice. It's for example, a black hat that Jewish people wear is not to protect them from rain. Many people, the opposite, when it rains, they take the hat off because they don't want to get ruined. So they wear it more for kavod, for honor, as identification that you belong to the Jewish people. And therefore, most people allow wearing black hats, and same thing for women, to wear hats. They don't wear, most women don't wear hats to protect them from the elements, but rather to look nice. Or
Cap is not allowed.
so cap, the same idea. If you wear it because that's your style, you didn't put it on for protection. But if you do wear it for protection and it is made from hard material and a tefach extends more than a tefach, then it would be similar to umbrella.
Rabbi,
Yes.
so then, are these allowed?
So that would be not allowed if it's a head covering that's explicitly designed to protect you from rain, then it would be forbidden.
Okay, so what about this? Something like this. Like it's more like a hat.
That also. Here you see, even though it's an item of clothing,
Yeah.
but
It's cool.
it's actually a very nice idea, a wearable umbrella, but it would
Soft.
be.
Is it soft? Because he said if it's soft, it's bendable, it's fine, right?
No, but this is like.
Yeah, this one has
Like, I don't even
structure
get
to it.
the kids.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to wear this.
So what we usually do on Shabbat is you get a waterproof
Right.
rain
And they still get wet.
jacket and boots
Right.
and pants, and also once they come home they change. So yes, you do get wet, but then you just try to work around it. Either you don't take your children to the synagogue on Shabbat, or you design your outing at the time when it's not raining yet, and on the way home it's okay because once you come home you change. Now, some examples of temporary tent is an umbrella, or sometimes children play what they call it, a fort. They put a few chairs and then they put a blanket over it, and then they hide and play underneath. So that would be not allowed because you're creating a temporary tent.
But you're not protecting yourself from anything.
You-
Like,
the-
even if
the-
it's at home?
Yes, even if it's at home, because the purpose for doing it is to play underneath, to create a space, and the space underneath is being used.
Is the child allowed to play underneath the table?
Yeah, child is allowed to play underneath the table because the main purpose of the table is tabletop. Now, what about opening a child stroller on Shabbat? So here we have a rule that anything that was open for a tefach before Shabbat, you can continue opening it. So a child's carriage, the preferable way is to open it before Shabbat. And then on Shabbat you can close it and open it. Or open it at least partially for one tefach before Shabbat. If that was not done and it's necessary to do it on Shabbat, one can rely on the opinions that allow opening and closing a stroller because they consider it part of its design. It's designed to be open and closed. Lechatchila, ideally we don't rely on that, and ideally you should open the hood before Shabbat. But in cases of necessity, there are those to rely on. Similarly, we're allowed to open awning if it was opened partially, or a sukkah cover, if it was extended at least the tefach beyond the roll, because the awning that's used for a sukkah, most of the time, it's a material that's rolled onto a pipe. So we don't count the thickness of the pipe as extension of the tent. The material has to come out of the pipe at least one tefach, and then I can extend it all the way to cover my entire sukkah or create a covering for the porch, and then I can withdraw it as well.
But then isn't that hat or that umbrella that's attached to your head or whatever that is, isn't it already open? Why are we not allowed to use that?
If you put that kind of hat on before Shabbat, that's true. It's already open and you can continue wearing it. But when it's down and you are extending by putting on your head, that would be forbidden. And an interesting application is if you forgot to turn off lights in your bedroom on Shabbat. So some people, what they do is they just cover the light with a cloth, a blanket. Nowadays it's not as dangerous because the lights are LED and they don't produce much heat. Or especially if you're not putting it directly on the light bulb, but there is some kind of fixture over it, so it's not going to heat up. So if you put it vertically, that's okay. However, what if you cover it horizontally? Then you're creating a tent. For example, you have lights like these that are flat, horizontal.
But you won't be able to cover it anyway unless
You would be able to cover it by sticking something, let's say a sheet on one side, and then picking it up and sticking it on the other side. And then you're covering it completely, and it's like a tent that you're protecting yourself from the light.
But didn't you say, let's say a child or whoever needs to sleep in that room, you're allowed to turn off that light?
You're not allowed to, but you can ask a non-Jew to turn off the light. If a child is sleeping or a person who cannot fall asleep and because of it he can get sick, you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to turn off the light. So this way, you would like to avoid, or in a case where you don't have a non-Jew, so you can cover the light, but not horizontally, because then you're creating a tent, but you can cover it from all the sides vertically. Another application is opening the table and adding a leaf in. Just like you can open a folding table or a chair, so too you can extend the table and add a leaf. Even though as you're adding the leaf, you're creating what looks like a roof, but again, it's to use the tabletop and therefore permitted.
But you can add a leaf?
You can add a leaf on Shabbat. And one more leniency is we have a concept that's called lavud. Lavud means that if you have two poles close to each other within the distance of 3 tfachim, which is under 24 centimeters, we consider that the space between these two poles, it's as if the space is filled in with the material that makes these poles. We use this, for example, in constructing walls of sukkah. If the walls of sukkah are made from, for example, porch walls, deck, even though there's space in between, we consider the entire thing as one wall. Or you have fencing, a lattice, or even ropes, one over the other, we consider it as complete wall. Similarly, if you have horizontal poles over you, but they are within 3 tfachim of each other, we consider that as if the space is closed, and therefore I can spread material over it. Therefore, if you have a frame, any kind of frame where the poles of the frame are close to each other, I can spread material over it, even though I'm creating the tent, because we consider that the tent was already there. For example, let's say you have a bird cage, and at night you want to cover the bird cage that they can sleep. You can do that because the bird cage is made of the wires that are close to each other. It's as if it's closed. Now, next application of building is actually assembling furniture. We can open folding chair, we can open folding bed and close it, and a table. However, if it's made up of pieces that we have to insert one into another, and in order for the table or the chair to be sturdy, we have to do it with force, that is not allowed. Therefore, if a leg of a table fell off, I cannot insert it back in. This is rabbinically forbidden because we might be tempted to nail it in or glue it in. So what do? Your table only has 3 legs, so you have to take a chair and put it under the table and support it like that, or take any other piece of furniture and just support it. But you cannot insert the leg in. If a piece of furniture is designed to be taken off and put back, then we're allowed. For example, drawers that come out and you can insert them back in are permitted. Drawers that we're talking about, a piece of furniture that's not attached to the wall or the floor. For example, kitchen cabinets are attached to the wall or the flooring, and therefore kitchen cabinets are more strict. If a kitchen cabinet door or drawer came out, that would be problematic to put it back in, because then I'm attaching something to the structure of the house. However, if you have a freestanding piece of furniture and a door comes off and it has a special mechanism to take off and put on, some door hinges are designed in such a way that it's easy to take off and on, or a drawer comes out and it's designed in such a way that it can, for example, you're searching for something deep inside, it's designed in a way that you can take it out, search for whatever you need and reinsert it, that would be permitted.
So if I have built-in closets in my house, my whole house.
Yeah, so built-in closets become part of your house, and therefore the more strict, the part of the house structure. Okay. Next is another application of building as it applies to hair. Braiding hair is similar to building. You're taking something that's free-flowing and you're making a structure from it. You're allowed to put your hair in a pony, but you cannot braid your hair. And whatever you cannot make on Shabbat, you cannot disassemble. You cannot undo a braid on Shabbat.
Well, what if you take off the rubber band and just fold it up?
Then it's not braided. Usually a braid where you twist it together, it's not going to be undone just by taking off rubber band. If it's just a pony, then it's not a problem. You can make a pony, you can take it off. Braiding means you take a few strands on here and you intertwine them in such a way that it's strong. And not only natural hair is not allowed to be braided, even artificial hair. So somebody who wears a wig, a sheitel, they cannot braid the hair of the sheitel. And therefore, even strands, let's say you have a scarf, and at the end of the scarf or shawl, it has long strands. So you cannot braid that. So any kind of braiding is similar to building.
So if the tzitzit gets tangled, you cannot do it.
So tzitzit, if it gets all tangled, if you can put your hand in and just without applying too much pressure, you can release it, that's fine. Or if you can just shake it, that's fine. But if you actually have to untangle it, then you cannot do it. Once you mentioned tzitzit, there is a different melacha that you're not allowed to tie or untie knots. So since tzitzit, at the end of each tzitzit, there is a double knot. If that double knot gets loose, we cannot tighten it.
The same applies to shoelaces.
Shoelaces, we should not use double knot. Shoelaces, we should use one knot and a bow on top. However, if the bow got messed up and it formed a double knot, one is allowed to undo the shoelace, because originally when we make a knot on shoelaces, it's a temporary knot only for a few hours or until we go to sleep. So since it's designed as a temporary knot, it's more lenient. So if shoelaces get tangled or tied into a double knot, you're allowed to untie it. If you can just slip your foot out of it, that's preferable. But if you cannot, you can untie it on Shabbat.
Can I ask you another question?
Yes.
It is mentioned here. I heard you're not allowed to let the hair be plucked, I guess?
Yes. We the melacha is that when we're not allowed to shear, cut wool of sheep, or we're not allowed to pluck feathers of a chicken, because feathers or down is used for making pillows and blankets. And similarly, even if it's not on animals, even if it is on people, we're not allowed to pluck hair or cut hair on Shabbat. We're not allowed to cut nails. If it's with an instrument, then it's deoraita, and if it's with teeth or by hand, it's derabanan, but nevertheless it's forbidden. Similarly, we're not allowed to tear skin or bite lips on Shabbat. You shouldn't do that during the week as well, but on Shabbat we're not allowed to bite our lips. And therefore, we should not use a hair brush that is very fine, that it shouldn't pull out hair.
And petting the animal, are we allowed to pet or not allowed to?
You're allowed to touch animal without moving it. Because animals are muktzah, so therefore you're not allowed to play with it or move it or pick it up. Just touching an animal is not forbidden, but animals that shed and by petting them you will be pulling out hair, that you should be careful with. Animals, because there is no purpose for animals. Anything that there is no purpose for them for Shabbat, we take them out of our mind on Shabbat. We plan not to use them on Shabbat. Whether they are domesticated or wild, birds, insects, animals are all muktzah. The rule about feeding animals is that any animal that is dependent on you for food, you're allowed to feed, except for fish. For two reasons. Number one, fish can live one day without food, no problem. It's even recommended that you should feed fish only 6 days out of the week and let them hungry for one day. It's healthy for them. So let that day be Shabbat. Second reason is that fish often have food in a place where they live. The normal place for fish is in a pond, and in the pond, even if you don't feed them, there are plants and there are insects that fall in. I had a friend in Muncie who had goldfish in a pond, and they said that they never feed them. Why? Because there are so many insects that fly around that they always have what to eat.
What if you have a tank?
Yes, so if you have a tank and you don't have plants growing in the tank and you don't have hopefully insects flying in your house, then they now become like animals that depend on you. But if it's a kind of fish, then you can ask your local pet shop or look at online. If it's a kind of fish that can survive and stay healthy without eating for one day, you should not feed it one day. And again, from the knowledge that I have is that it's healthy for fish not to eat one day a week. But of course, let's say you have a 2-day Yom Tov and Shabbat, 2-day Yom Tov after Shabbat, 3 days, then for sure you can feed, because even fish, it's not healthy for them not to eat for 3 days. So yes, the answer is, if necessary, you can feed fish. And wild animals we're not supposed to feed, because they're not dependent on us for food. Until now they survived and they will survive. However, if you see that an animal is suffering because it's hungry, let's say in the winter when snow covers the ground and there is no grass, and whichever animal depends on grass is hungry, so then you're allowed to feed it on Shabbat. Yeah, so plain regular animals, birds, we shouldn't feed on Shabbat. Children is a different story. For children, you just tell them what the rule is. Then if they don't listen to you, then depending on age, you can ignore it. Okay. There is a case when I'm not allowed to create a temporary mechitza. We said that a mechitza is permitted, a temporary division. If I want to just separate between men and women, or just for privacy, I don't want people to see me, so I put a mechitza. But if the mechitza serves a halachic purpose, then it's not allowed. Which means that until I create this wall, temporary wall, I could not do something, and now this mechitza will allow me to do something, then I'm not allowed to do it. An example of it is, let's say on Sukkot, one of my walls fell. And now I just want to, I'm not going to touch the wall. That wall was built from wood and it's muktzah, I cannot touch it. But let's say I'm going to just take the synagogue mechitza, the folding one, I'm going to bring it to my sukkah and I'm going to put it as a wall. Not allowed. Why? Because now the sukkah is not kosher with only 2 walls. By putting a third wall, I'm creating a kosher sukkah. And that's not allowed. If, however, my sukkah already has 3 walls, and I just want to put a 4th wall just so that it's more private, nobody looks inside, that's permitted. Okay, now the next halacha is, now we're going to go quickly through smaller halachot. Laundering, cleaning clothing, This is the milach of milaben. Milaben in Torah was bleaching. They would take wool from sheep, and before you could use it, it could be of any color. You have to first bleach it to make it white. So any kind of washing and removing, in order to remove dirt or stains from garments, is forbidden. And that includes the actual laundering of the whole garment, or even spot cleaning. And even soaking is forbidden. So even if the entire garment is fine, you just have one dot that pomegranate juice spilled on you. You cannot take a little bit water and soap and just rub it on that spot. That's forbidden. And not only that, you can't even take a drop of water and put it there to spread it and make it a little lighter. Even a drop of water, because that already will have a desired effect.
So you can't put salt on something?
Salt?
Yeah, sometimes people put salt on like dirty stains.
And the salt absorbs. Yes. Yeah. If since your intent is to clean it, and that's salt, or you put the dry laundry detergent on it, that's not allowed. Now, what do you do? What do you do if something spilled on your clothing? So you can remove the surface material, which means, let's say, gravy spilled. So you can take a spoon or a knife or a napkin and gently wipe the surface dirt. But whatever dirt was absorbed into the material, you can no longer extract. You can no longer squeeze it. Not only soaking material in water is forbidden, but let's say the material was already soaked in water from before, I'm not allowed to wring it. I'm not allowed to squeeze it on Shabbat. Whether it was done on purpose, it was soaked on purpose, or not. For example, a person who's walking in a street and it rained and he became soaked. When he comes home, he's not allowed to squeeze his clothing to extract the water. And therefore, we cannot use a sponge that absorbs water. We cannot wash dishes with a sponge that absorbs water. And the test for it is, if I soak the sponge in water and then I pick it up, if all the water runs out, that's a good sponge, doesn't absorb. But if some water stays and I have to squeeze it to let the water out, such a sponge I cannot use.
But if those sponges, if they have, let's say, tear, is that okay to continue using them?
Yeah, that's fine.
Tears are fine.
Yeah, the tears are fine. If a sponge gets ripped, that's fine. You can use it. But cloth or a sponge that absorbs, we cannot use to wash dishes or to wash the body on Shabbat.
Can I use Bounty that was pre-cut to, like, let's say something spilled?
So, yes, one way to clean the table is to use pre-cut Bounty, or even a cloth shmata to wipe it. You cannot wet the Bounty or the cloth and then wash the table, but if the liquid is already on the table, you can wipe it.
Wait, I cannot like run the Bounty through a water sink? No?
Through
Through water, like through my sink.
No, you cannot soak it, but rather you should sprinkle some water on the table and then wipe it. Similarly, if you have a spill on the floor, after you wipe it, it's still sticky, you want to wash it, don't take a wet sponge or cloth or paper towel, but rather sprinkle some water on it and then wipe it. The next melacha is sewing. We're not allowed to join two materials permanently, whether it's with thread or with glue. And what is considered sewing? Either you make 3 passes with a needle through two pieces of material, even without tying both ends with a knot. So you go in, out, in, even without tying. Or if you do tie, even going once and you tie both ends, that already attaches both materials. Now, what about using a safety pin to connect two sides of the garment? So for Ashkenazim it's forbidden, but for Sephardim we're lenient and you're allowed to use a safety pin, but don't run it through the material a few times and then pin it. Just go once through one side, once through the other side, and pin it, and that's it. If you notice on your clothing that a seam started to split, and you see a thread sticking out, you cannot pull the thread to tighten the material, because that tightening is like sewing it.
It's already sewed.
Even though it's already sewed, but now it became separated, you cannot pull it back together. And we are also not allowed to tear material if our intent is to sew it on that place. For example, you see that whoever made that seam made it in the wrong place, so now you want to tear it so that after Shabbat you can make the garment fit you better. You're not allowed to tear. If the tearing is to destroy it, that is not forbidden. However, if the tearing is constructive, because I want to sew that garment in a better place, that is forbidden.
Sometimes when you buy skirts or even suits for men, you know how the energy suits, they have those,
Yeah, so that is not permitted. For example, some suits, the pockets are sewn together, so I have to separate it before Shabbat.
Now it's open? Why?
Because right now the pocket is unusable. By tearing it, I'm making the pocket usable.
But not in pockets, like let's say behind the suit they have those, the two sides. They sew it together, right?
Yeah. So also this should be undone before. We said that if it's just a label that's hanging, so I'm allowed to cut the label. I'm not improving the suit. I can wear the suit as is, and I'm just removing it, throwing it out. Here I'm actually improving the suit by cutting the threads that connect two sides. Okay. One more melacha is planting. Planting means putting a seed into the ground, or planting a sapling into the ground, or anything that helps a plant to grow. We're not allowed to water plants, and therefore, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're not allowed to wash our hands on the ground where there is grass or trees or potentially something can grow. And therefore, we should be careful if we are eating outside. We should try to prevent liquids from spilling off the table and onto the grass. House plants, even though they're not in the ground but in a flower pot, we're not allowed to water.
I read somewhere if it has like those holes in those pots, it is allowed because the water doesn't stay.
So it's still not allowed. Just it's from the Torah prohibition, it becomes rabbinic prohibition. Now, if you have a flower pot, you're not even allowed to bring it closer to the sun. And it's muktzah, because it's a growing plant, it's muktzah. But in such a case, I'm not even supposed to open shade with intent that it should grow better. If I'm opening the shade because I want the light in for myself, that's okay. But if I'm opening the shade with an intent that the plant should receive more sunlight and therefore grow better, it's forbidden.
Are you allowed to step on grass?
We're allowed to step on grass. If the grass is tall, then we should walk slowly, not to pull it and not to tear it.
Even if you have heels outside?
Yes, yes. And if you walked on grass and then you come home and you find that grass is attached to your boots, then both grass and the mud are muktzeh, and you should not take it with your hands, but rather with something else. You should scrape it with something else.
The kids are allowed to use the pipes on the grass, let's say.
Yes, you're allowed to push a stroller on a grassy surface. Children can ride the bike on grass. Yes, we can sit on grass, lie on grass. That's permitted. We're not allowed to climb a tree. We're not allowed to use a tree. And that is because we're not allowed to pick fruit or leaves or branches off of a tree. This is a different melacha of harvesting. So therefore, we have to be careful as we walk on a street or talking to a friend and we're standing next to a bush. We shouldn't by mistake pluck a leaf or a branch off to play with.
Is that a rabbinical prohibition?
That is a rabbinical prohibition because you don't need the leaf or the plant. But if you need it, for example, you forget about it and you take a flower, or you forget about it and you take an apple or a grape, that is forbidden according to Torah. However, if I have flowers that were already cut and they were put in water, since they're basically already dead, now they're on their way to die, they don't have roots and they will just wither away, they are not muktzah. So a bouquet of flowers in a vase can be moved, and for Sephardim you can even take a flower out of the vase to smell it and you can put it back in.
Can you put water in it?
Yeah.
On Yom Tov you can add water, on Shabbat you can take out and put back in, but not add water. So, for example, if flowers fell out, you can put the flowers back into the vase. But we don't...
What about dirt? We're allowed to put dirt back?
No, if a flower pot
Yeah.
tilted, fell, and dirt came out, you cannot put the dirt back in, because putting dirt back in makes the plant grow better, and that is forbidden under planting. Okay, and quickly I'm going to go through a few more. We're not allowed to trap animals if they are domesticated and they will go to us freely, they're not scared of us, then it's not considered trapping. So if you have a cat or a dog and they're friendly to you and they like you and they come to you by themselves, then even if you hold on to it, you take it, you lock it in a room, that's not considered trapping. However, if an animal would run away from you, then taking it and locking it in a house, in a room, or a pen, corral for the animals would be trapping. Similarly, we're not allowed to fish. We're not allowed to catch a fish from our fish tank.
If it's a dead fish, are we allowed to remove this?
Dead fish is muktzah in the fish tank, but if you're not removing it with your hand, but with a spoon, with a cup, something else, you're not touching it, that would be moving muktzah indirectly, and that would be okay. And additionally, we're not allowed to kill animals or even insects. So if it's a dangerous insect, we're allowed to kill it or trap it, chase it away. You are allowed to use a spray.
You mean a mosquito?
Some consider mosquitoes dangerous, some don't. If you live in a vicinity where mosquitoes carry dangerous diseases, and you've heard of cases that people got sick, then you can kill such mosquitoes. If it's uncommon and you're not worried about it, then better not kill them. But however, you are allowed to spray on your skin a spray that chases the mosquitoes away. And you can even spray a spray that kills mosquitoes, but not directly at them. You can spray it in the room so that if they come, they're going to be killed, but you cannot kill them directly. Bees, if you know that you are allergic to bees, then you can kill bees. Otherwise, bees usually don't bite. They don't sting if you don't threaten them. So the best is if you have a bee in your house or in your sukkah, is just to stay still until it explores its surroundings, takes whatever it wants to take, and leaves. And then they don't hurt you. Similarly to killing an insect or an animal, we cannot wound an animal to draw blood. And there are two kinds of wound. One is open wound where blood comes out, and one is closed wound that we call black and blue, where the capillaries break and the blood comes out, but it stays under skin. So both are forbidden. And therefore we have to be careful when you pinch children. Don't pinch them too hard that it should cause a black and blue. That is forbidden. Okay. With this, I will finish covering the 39 melachot. We mentioned the most popular ones with examples that are the most applicable. If you have questions, you can ask now.
I always have questions at home.
Keep in mind that we learned just brief laws. We learned a little bit background, but not a lot. And so there is always more material to learn, more examples, more halachot. So don't think that you covered everything. Continue learning, continue exploring. And also keep in mind that we covered most of the time one opinion, and sometimes I mentioned the more strict opinion. But in almost every halacha that I mentioned, there are various opinions. Therefore, if you hear other rabbis saying halachot slightly different, keep in mind that there are different halachot. Whatever I mentioned, if you hear more strict opinions and you want to adapt more strict opinions, you're welcome. It's praiseworthy. But before adopting a more lenient opinion, you should consult a rabbi, because a lenient opinion might not be applicable in every case. Okay? Yes.
If let's say you are going on vacation, let's say, right? And let's say you are bringing the food and all that stuff, and you are there over like Shabbat and then Sunday, are the kids allowed to, let's say if it's like a water park place, right? Are the kids allowed to still go on the water rides and all that stuff?
If you want to go to a water park or any other amusement park on Shabbat, there are many issues with it. Many issues. Just going there, how are you going to get there? And even if it's nearby, what about eruv? Usually there is no eruv, so you cannot carry anything.
If it's in the hotel, let's say.
Yeah, so let's say it's in a hotel. If these rides are electric, so that presents another issue.
Are they already electric whether or not you're on it? Like rides, like I'm talking about just like sliding and all that stuff.
Somewhere like Kalahari?
Yeah.
Oh, it's like water,
Yeah.
so it's not electric. So if you already paid, right, you don't have to deal with money or credit cards, you don't have to sign anything, it's part of the fun. So then, let's say a water park that you don't have to carry, there is no electricity, no money involved, then for children it would be okay. For adults it would still be a problem. But for children it would be okay, then you just have to make sure not to squeeze their wet clothing, not to squeeze their hair when you dry them, and things like that. Again, if possible, plan it not on Shabbat. There are better things to do on Shabbat, to relax, to spend with the family. If you're already stuck there and your children are crying and they're running there, so you don't have to stop them. Okay, Shabbat Shalom. All the best.